Final Fantasy VI. If you have no idea what Final Fantasy is, what lonely stretch of wasteland have you been living under for the last 2 decades? Final Fantasy is a series that's been around since 1987 in Japan and 1990 everywhere else, and has had more entries in the core series, side stories, and spin-off games than grains of sand on a beach or stars in the sky. Final Fantasy VI originally released in North America for the Super Nintendo in 1994 under the title Final Fantasy III. This was because developer Square hadn't localized every Final Fantasy title for North American audiences. Thus, Final Fantasy IV became Final Fantasy II in the West, and Final Fantasy VI became Final Fantasy III. See, this number thing is confusing! However, for the purposes of this video, I will be calling Final Fantasy VI Final Fantasy VI, because all subsequent adaptations and remakes have made use of the Japanese numbering system to avoid further confusing already confused Western markets. Meaning me! Often regarded as one of the best 16-bit RPGs ever made in the history of, well, ever. Final Fantasy VI has so many great moments that if you haven't played it yet, I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil a game that's nearly 20 years old. That's how good it is. So play it. How good is Final Fantasy VI, you might be asking? After I just yelled at you about how good it is. Well, for starters, the opening hour or so from the beginning to when you have a full party is pretty much perfect. Given the massive limitations of the Super Nintendo's hardware, developer Squaresoft managed to convey so much effective storytelling in the opening minutes of the game that even if you're a complete idiot, you can understand what's happening, how to play, maybe even give 2 shamrocks about what's happening in the story, all without the massive amount of hand-holding most modern games force upon gamers today. Don't believe me? Well, that's fine, because I have an entire video that will explain in great detail what makes the beginning of Final Fantasy VI so good it makes grown men pregnant with emotion. Number 1, the introduction. Okay, so let's say for the sake of argument that you are a dummy and you've never heard of Final Fantasy and have no idea what to expect from a game titled Final Fantasy VI. You didn't read the back of the box or the instruction manual, and you're going into the game tabula rasa. That's a fancy word for blank slate, because I want to sound smart. So, as you boot up the game for the very first time and start a new game, you might be thinking to yourself, I never played the other 5 Final Fantasy titles. Won't I be missing out on some kind of continuity between them? Won't I be completely lost because I'm a stupid idiot? I don't know if I want to invest in something like that. And all of a sudden there are words on the screen and holy shiitake mushrooms! They are describing the backstory of the game. Why is this important? Why is this something to get so excited about? Well, because the very first thing that Final Fantasy VI tells you is that any important events that occurred before the game happened long ago. How long ago is long ago, you might ask? I don't understand because I'm a stupid idiot. Whoa! 1,000 years ago? Now, I ain't no mathematics savant, but I do know that 1,000 is a pretty large number, so right off the bat, the game is communicating to the player that they don't need to have played the previous games in the series in order to understand and enjoy this one. Great! Also, it makes it pretty clear that magic is a super powerful and scary thing, given that one war involving magic was enough to render the world a scorched wasteland. Then it goes on to show a cool steampunk castle while describing people who want to
enslave the world.
Remember that part, because it's gonna come back again later!
Number 2, things start happening.
So, after the brief introduction, the camera pans over to a snowy cliff-looking thing overlooking a giant canyon with a town below, nestled between the large tracts of canyon. For a few seconds, nothing happens. This is the game letting you take in the vista and realize there's a town down there, and allowing you, the gamer, time to process the story elements that it just threw at you. Suddenly, 3 figures walk into view, and what the sweet Susie are they wearing? Mother-loving mech suits! Yeah, that's right, there are gonna be mech suits in this game. Yeah! Now, at first glance, it's awesome because they're wearing mech suits, but you also immediately understand something else, that one of the people is different from the other 2, because they look different, and you have eyes. And, okay, hold the Hearthstones, Biggs and Wedge. Like, these 2 guys. X-Wing pilots from the Star Wars movies. It's kind of awesome if that's an intentional reference to some of the greatest science fantasy films ever made, and it kind of draws a good comparison because Star Wars and Final Fantasy VI are also similar in many ways. So keep that in mind! Anyway, back on track. Biggs and Wedge, they start talking, and they mention something about a thing called an Esper, and kind of rehash a bit of the intro. Then they turn and they start discussing the person who looks different from them, but like right in front of her, like she can't hear them. Which, if you don't know and are a social pariah like me, is apparently rude. And notice the first little touch that they add here. Biggs says, and this woman, this ellipses sorceress, why is she here? The addition of that ellipses makes that statement. It conveys that magic is still scary to people, and anyone who uses it in this world is worth being uneasy over. It alienates this lady while also elevating her in terms of importance. Then, the next part of his statement really catches your attention.
I heard she fried 50 of our Magitech armored soldiers in under 3 minutes?
At this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, this lady killed 50 soldiers in 3 minutes? What? This game is really hammering home that not only was magic a powerful force to be feared like 1,000 years ago in the past, it's also going an extra step to make sure the player understands that magic is still powerful in the present and well worth Biggs and Wedge and other people being a bit nervous over. All the emphasis on magic allows the player to subconsciously set up a framework for the narrative that will unfold. It will doubtlessly involve magic in some major way. Don't need to be a genius! Then we have the first clues to why these two guys are talking about the sorceress like she can't hear them. And Wedge interjects that she's wearing a thing called a slave crown that robs her of all conscious thought. This is important because it establishes two things. First, this lady is not in this situation by choice, but is being forced to go on a mission involving the S-pair. Whatever an E-spear is. Second, people don't usually root for people who enslave people to do their bidding, tipping off the audience that Biggs and Wedge probably aren't members of Team Good Guy. In the past 5 seconds, you've just learned more about the game and the game world than most games bothered to teach you in the first half hour. After a bit more exchange, they begin making their way toward the town at the bottom of the canyon, and you get this credit roll / main theme overture / mechanical suited figures walking across a frozen tundra scene thing, which is so freaking amazing! At the time, this was the pinnacle of technological achievement on the Super Nintendo, or SNES. By the way, if you call it a SNES, you're wrong! And it's still an effective opening today. Brilliant soundtrack by Nobuo Uematsu. Sorry I butchered your name, Mr. Nobuo. Really gives a feeling of what I can only describe as heroic foreboding, while the town looms closer and closer in the distance. This lets you know that there are going to be hero things going on, but also that the tone of the game is going to be kind of dark. Number 3, gameplay, power, and Magitech. The 3 figures arrive in the town, and for the first time the text doesn't automatically scroll. I will now assume the role of someone who is playing the game for the first time and is a complete nerf herder and doesn't understand basic concepts of like pressing buttons or anything. What do I do? There are no prompts. How am I supposed to function without the game telling my stupid gamer brain what to do? Well, then I look down at the controller and I notice that there are some buttons. I guess I could try pressing those? So, I press the buttons, and guess what? The dialogue moves along, and suddenly no more dialogue. I'm standing still. Well, now what do I do? Maybe if the buttons do something, the thing called the directional pad with the arrows will do something too. I press the upward arrow, and holy Balzac! I'm moving around like a thing that moves. Yay for simians! Completely inexperienced person can figure out what to do without the game giving prompts, simply through simple experimentation with the only thing they can experiment with, which is like a total of like 7 buttons. This isn't the Cuban rocket science crisis. Going back to assuming that you know basic functions of video games like movement and have proceeded further than the first step of the game, you begin walking forward and then a guy and a dog come towards you from the town. And they're bringing you Keckless. Keckless? What did I just write in this script? I don't understand. They ain't bringing you cakes! Instead, to hammer home the vague feeling of unease set by the intro, the dialogue between Biggs and Wedge, and the ominous music during the long tundra walking sequence, the guard you encounter calls you machine-writing, self-important swine, and then attacks with his dog. And suddenly, whoa! The screen goes weird, and the music changes. What the DuckTales? So you're in the fight, right? And there's this giant wolf thing called the Lobo on the left side of the screen, and you're kind of confused, lost, and scared because you're a puppy. And then you realize a few things fairly quickly. You see your team of guys on the right-hand side of the screen, and the sorceress doesn't have a name, it's just a bunch of question marks. This makes you remember that you haven't learned her name, so that makes sense, I guess. And then you have the numbers by the names and the question marks, and some bars that rapidly fill up as time goes by. When the meter fills up, suddenly a menu pops up and there's a little cursor thing to indicate which option is being selected. What are the 2 skills you've learned so far in this game? How to move and how to move the dialogue along. Maybe they apply here. And lo, the angels sing, for they do. And you also see the word Magitech for the second time, and it clicks in your brain that you're riding in Magitech armored suits that Biggs and Wedge mentioned a minute before this. So you select Magitech from the menu, but not before the Lobo hits one of your dudes, and you see the numbers by his bar and name go down by the number that briefly appeared on the screen near the guy that got hit. This is important because it's the first indication of what those numbers mean. Now you know that those numbers are probably something akin to the character's life, indicating how many hits the character can take before falling unconscious, assuming that you know basic skills like mathematics. Anyway, you select Magitech and you see freaking Walmart of options. You got Fire, Bolt, and Ice Beams, Bioblast, Heal Force, Confuser, X-Fur, and the mother-respecting Tech Missile. Woo! So you select one of those because you don't really know what any of them do beyond your slim shady of a guess. And holy shiminy cricket! You kill the thing in one shot. Well, maybe only the wolf thing was really weak, right? After you have a little dance party, the soldier who sicked his dog on you runs away, and now the only direction you have left to move is straight ahead down the main street into the town. And you're immediately confronted by 2 more soldiers who inform you that the name of the town is Narshe, and that not only are your guys the bad guys, but that they are soldiers of an evil empire. The 2 guards also die in one hit from anything the Magitech armor can throw at them. So yeah, you now know that both magic and Magitech are extremely powerful, and this complete steamrolling of any resistance also serves to reflect the Empire's massive strength and the futility of resisting their advance. Continuing through Narshe, you fight more dudes. I'm not really going to go into detail on each of these fights because I don't really need to. All that really happens is that the players are being given chances to experiment with abilities, basically learn basic concepts of the game, like what things do and what visual cues mean what. One thing I do want to point out is that there's a great little touch to one of the guard animations. After you kill the first couple of guards you come across, you encounter a second pair of guards. These 2 first send their Lobos against you. After you take them out without breaking a sweat, they both charge you. But there's a second of hesitation where they move forward and then they stop, and then they proceed to move forward again and charge you and fight you. This is kind of neat because in 16-bit graphics there aren't many ways to convey emotion, let alone complex emotions like internal conflict between duty and fear. That split second of hesitation is enough to show that the guards of Narshe know they're fighting a losing battle, and really adds a lot of context to the scene besides just shoving waves of weak enemies at the player. It gives the combat a little extra touch of meaning and nuance without having a disruptive dialogue window interrupting the scene. Like this!
Part 4. Saving random battles and bosses.
Anyway, see direct Biggs and Wedge and question marks as they destroy absolutely everything that they come across in the main street of Narshe, and since really there aren't any other directions you can go. Eventually you enter a mine. As you walk in, there's a shiny area to your left. Instead of having a big old prompt appear on screen, there's just a shiny thing right there. You can walk by it if you want, but most players are curious critters and will go over to check it out. Turns out that it's a save point. How about that? And if you step on it and you have no idea what it is, the game offers to tell you more about it and tells you that it's a save point. And since that's kind of a complicated idea, you know, you can either accept or decline. If you already know what a save point is, you don't need to listen to the game babble about save points, which is great. Also, at this point, if you get the explanation, it tells you how to bring up the menu, which shows you how to look at your items and your skills outside of battle, which is kind of handy. So, Whatever, you continue through the mine and the game throws one of its primary features at you, random battles. The most important aspect of this is that it teaches players that they won't always be able to see their enemies coming before a fight, meaning they won't know when, where, or what they will be fighting. This is an important lesson because it's also the part of the game that teaches you should save whenever there's an available save point, because there's probably going to be something dangerous around the corner. It's going to kill you. Probably, maybe. Following the save point, you encounter a giant snail boss. Surprise! Named Welk. Immediately, a player will understand that this isn't a normal battle. This is evidenced by the numerous sound and visual cues given when entering this boss fight. The music takes on a more urgent, frantic tone, while we see a dialogue in a fight scenario, which is something that hasn't occurred before in the past 5 minutes we've been playing Final Fantasy VI. That's right! We're only in the first 5 minutes! Since this is a first-time occurrence, it acts as a clue to the player that they shouldn't ignore what is being said. Biggs and Wedge have a little back and forth about the boss, and what it boils down to is not to attack the shell. To follow this advice, there's pretty much no way for the fight to go poorly. However, there's a small chance that the player can accidentally attack the shell when the snail's head disappears. And it says, If this happens, it teaches the player that timing attacks will be an important part of the gameplay in future battles, and it's something to pay attention to instead of just attacking willy-nilly. This battle is designed to be the player's introductory challenge, the first fight where they will be put in actual danger and have to put what they learned to the test. That's why there was a save point right before this. Using all the skills you've learned by simply playing the game, you'll be able to defeat Welk. After conquering Welk and learning how awesome it is to see a spontaneously combusting snail, or dying and really learning the importance of save points, because you have to sit through the entire intro again, the trio of Biggs, Wedge, and Question Mark Face enter a room that has the Epser trapped in ice. A strange blue glow fills the room, and a battle begins in which Biggs and Wedge, who've already been established as incredibly powerful in their Magitech armored suits, they're both vaporized instantaneously. Meanwhile, Lady Question Mark has her suit exploded by the strange frozen Erbser, and everything fades to black. Now, there's quite a bit to go through, so it's time to take a break from this breakdown and break it into multiple breaks. See you next time.
Oh, hi there. If you enjoyed the music in this video, great! Be sure to head over to ocremix.org for more great music and awesome scintillating tunes, because they make good music and they give it away for free for some reason. So go there.